Hello. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, we're getting better. Hello. Greetings. Hello. Hello, hello. Hello. It's a little bit after 6:30, so we think we should get started. So some of you may not have eaten dinner and may want to at some point later tonight. Much more French than American, eating at 9:30 or 10. So, welcome to the Portland Art Museum. I'm Bonnie Laing-Malcolmson, the Arlene and Harold Schnitzer Curator of Northwest Art, and I'm very glad that you could all attend tonight. This program was inspired by the museum's third Biennial Contemporary Northwest Art Awards. Our education programming department and curatorial department and I were talking about what sorts of programming we could do that would be meaningful around the Contemporary Northwest Art Awards, and thought that it would be a nice idea to talk about some of the regional arts institutions that are specifically doing programming that has honors, awards, cash prizes, honoraria, that really work at trying to support Northwest artists, and also to open up a kind of dialogue about ways that we could better support regional artists, and both by offering exhibitions and doing special kinds of programming, and talking about the role that financial support plays in the art world these days, as we have a very difficult financial time upon us. So I'm really happy that all of you would come to share in this discussion, and maybe we'll learn some things and think about some different things that we could do with our programming from you. And I'm not going to talk about our format much at all, because Terri Hopkins, who I'm now going to introduce, who's our moderator tonight, is going to tell you all about our format. I don't really know about it anyway, so I was much happier that way, really. So I am really delighted to introduce Terri Hopkins, who has served as director and curator of the art gym at Marylhurst for, I think, 33 years, which is brilliant. Yeah. Amazing. Terri and a couple of the faculty members, department chair, Paul Sutinen and Kay Slasarenko, and Terri founded the art gym in 1980, and it has done exceptional programming through Terri's curatorial expertise, programming expertise, and fundraising abilities, because the art gym has been run with the support of the university, with a beautiful space, heat, lights, and water. And then Terri has pretty much written every grant, or close to.
No heat.
No heat. Oh, really? You've had to pay for the heat? Oh my God. Okay.
No, there just isn't much.
There isn't much, no. It's a little chilly in the winter, and it's a bit toasty in the summer, so it hasn't been open in the summer. So if any of you are feeling philanthropic, and I'm going to do a fundraising pitch for the art gym, okay? I know they're working to put air conditioning in so that they can keep the art gym open 12 months of the year, which would be wonderful, since their programming has been exceptional and has offered a number of both group but mainly single-person shows for regional artists and others, but primarily regional artists, through those 33 years. So I think it's been just amazing. Terri has curated over 150 exhibitions. She's produced over 65 brochures and catalogs, from large hardcover books to small couple-fold brochures, and really contributed to the scholarship on Northwest artists, which I think has been very, very important. Terri's also served on the Regional Art and Culture Council's Public Art Advisory Board, and she chaired that board for a time. She's been on selection panels for Light Rail for the Oregon Convention Center and other public arts projects, and she's served on the Oregon Arts Commission's Opportunity Panel and other state and local grant makers committees, so she has a lot of experience with that. What else can I say? Terri will be retiring in a few months, and we hope she'll continue to keep her hand in the arts as a consultant and programming person, and whatever you can do, because you've done such a service for the Northwest. And I and we at the Portland Art Museum are so pleased that you'd moderate this panel tonight. Thank you so much. And please welcome Terri. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. So, oh, I'm supposed to tell you to please turn off your cell phones.
Really?
Silence them,
We hate that.
whatever you do. At the art gym, we don't have gallery talks, we have conversations. And so I have a little bit of experience helping to guide a conversation, which is more what I'd like to do tonight than have a panel discussion. Okay. So the structure will be that I'm going to introduce each of the people here, and then they're going to talk extremely briefly about the, I will cut them off, about the programs that their institutions sponsor, that what I'm most interested in, that put money in the pockets of artists, either as grants or as sort of funding for commissioning work. Because the title is Streams of Support. So how do we, the conversation is about how do those of us, and everybody here is kind of curatorial and director roles, how do we get that money and channel it to artists? And what are we doing now, and what might we do? What are some good ideas that are out there? Who are we partnering with? That kind of thing. So I'll start, and I want to have time for you to enter the conversation with questions. And we'll also try to limit this to an hour. That'd be the other goal, and since I don't have a watch, I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I see a whole lot of people have cell phones out, and we'll do it. I have that clicker thing. What do I do with that? Okay. So we do have some pictures, but I'm not asking the panelists to talk about the pictures because they would spend a lot of time doing that. And I want to talk about money. Okay. So Bonnie was the one who introduced me, and Bonnie Laing-Malcolmson, for those of you who may not know her background, let's see, we're going to go this way? Oh, there we go. That's Harold and Arlene Schnitzer, who funded her position. So she has an endowed curatorial position, which is wonderful. We really need people to do that. Bonnie is the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Curator of Northwest Art, so her program is regional. She came to the Portland Art Museum from the Oregon College of Art and Craft, where she was president. Not executive director. She was president, and she led that organization to just major steps forward in terms of the health of that organization. It was really great, and she came to OCAC from Paris Gibson Square Museum of Art in Montana. So she has been in the role as a curator, as a major fundraiser for an art school, and now she's back to being a curator of Northwest Arts. She also went to what was then the Museum Art School, so she started this journey as an artist. So those are some images from Northwest Art Awards exhibitions. Next is Catharina Manchanda, did I say that right? From the Seattle Art Museum. And Catharina is also has an endowed curatorial position, the John and Mary Shirley. She's the John and Mary Shirley Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Seattle Art Museum. She's originally from Stuttgart, Germany. And her previous museum posts were at the Wexner Center for the Arts at Ohio State University, the Kemper Art Museum in St. Louis, the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Next to her is Kristan Kennedy, who is the visual art curator for the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, PICA. Kristan is an artist. She either has just had or is about to have a couple shows back east. And she curates the visual arts part of PICA for TBA, and I think works with artists throughout the year in residencies, in the resource room, and in other spaces. So she's very involved with supporting artists in the production of art. Next to her, they changed places, is Amanda Hunt. And Amanda is this year's guest curator for Disjecta, the Disjecta Biennial. And she is currently the curator at LAXART in Los Angeles. And she has in the past worked at galleries including Whitechapel in London, and the Wadis Institute for Contemporary Art in San Francisco, the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And next to Amanda is Bryan Suereth, and Bryan founded Disjecta in 2000, is that right, Bryan? And it had a number of iterations, but at the moment it is really fabulous. And he is he turned, I don't know, a bowling alley into something amazing. Is that right? So it's an awesome space that I kind of covet every time I go there. And they do great work in visual arts and in performing arts. So they do a lot with regional, national, and international artists. And their guest curatorial program, I think, is really important in terms of bringing curators to Portland from other areas often to engage with the artists who work here. So that's an interesting model. So I could show you some more pictures. That's Betty Bowen, some of the award winners. PICA has this new Precipice Fund, so that's a little different model that we'll hear about from Kristan than the award exhibition model. But these are Northwest artists that she has shown. And Disjecta sponsors the Portland Biennial. All right. I really want to sit here, but if I can't, I'll stand back up so I can see you and see others, but I feel funny being the only one standing in the room. So that said, I'm going to start with you, Bonnie. If you could describe the Northwest Art Award program briefly and the kind of money that's involved and how it came about.
Sure. The Contemporary Northwest Art Awards is a program that kind of evolved from the Oregon Biennial. And when Arlene and Harold Schnitzer endowed the position of Curator of Northwest Art in 2005-ish, 2005, 2006, and it became a real regional position because this position covers Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. They decided an Oregon Biennial wouldn't work anymore, and we needed to do something that would really engage artists from a 5-state region. And really, Bruce Gunther and Arlene Schnitzer sat down together and talked about different sorts of exhibits and kinds of programming for artists, and thought that a model that instead of being what I'm going to call kind of a scattergun approach, where a lot of artists have one piece in a show, instead there would be more works usually, by single artists, and then there would be 5 to maybe 7 artists involved in the show. Each artist would receive an honorarium, which I have to say I hope grows through time. So with the award winners, each of the 6 artists that are in the current exhibit that's up, we consider award winners, and they receive a tiny $1,500 award, plus we wine them and dine them, put up their work, do a catalog that goes out to museums and galleries around the United States, and try to do as much public relations work as possible. Out of that group of artists, Arlene Schnitzer generously gives a $10,000 prize, and that prize is selected by all of the museum's curators, the museum's director, and the museum's associate curator. So there's 9 of us that vote, and we choose the person with a 1 to 5 rating system and blind ballot, and that's how we come up with the prize winner. Every other year. So it's an interesting process. One of the things that's really been good for me as curator of Northwest Art is it's a nominating process. So the previous Northwest curator, Jennifer Gately, started out by putting together a nominating list of curators, directors, other artists, art critics, collectors around the 5-state region. And then when I got here 3.5 years ago, I went through that list, edited and added and subtracted. And I continue to do that every couple years when I do the show. I change and edit the list and try to add and subtract people from that list so that I get kind of a fresh look. I also try to get into all the nooks and crannies of the West. So I look for curators, critics, art people that are, you know, out in Chester, Montana, and other sorts of places so that I can get really a broad representation. The nominating process has been really good because it means other arts professionals are picking usually 3 artists that they think really deserve to be in a contemporary show at the Portland Art Museum. So it's already a bit pre-programmed, and I'm seeing educated choices by educated people, and it really has helped me learn about artists around the Northwest. I think that's been one of the best parts of this process. It's also provided the opportunity for me to do some other kinds of exhibits. I have the Apex series, which is 3 different one-person shows each year in the Northwest galleries on the 4th floor of the building next door. And so oftentimes I look at people who have been finalists for the Northwest Art Awards and choose them. We've done 3 Contemporary Northwest Art Awards show. I've done 2, and Jennifer Gately did 1. Jennifer used a co-curator on that first exhibit, and I used a co-curator from outside of the immediate region. And we do that to bring another set of eyes with someone who usually has the ability to exhibit artists and help promote artists outside of the Northwest. So part of our goal is to also inform people outside of the region of the kind of talent and strength in the arts in the greater Northwest. I think that's almost all I'm going to say right now. The 3 slides that you saw were the $10,000 Schnitzer Award winners from this year and the previous 2 exhibits. So that's what that is about. And when we get to questions, if you have any more, feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Great. Catharina?
Hello, and thank you for having me. Hope everybody can hear me up here. Mics are always different. Yes? Oh no, this is somebody just waving to someone who just entered, not telling me that the mic is totally off. So the Betty Bowen Award has been around for a long time. Betty Bowen worked as a public relations director at the Seattle Art Museum from like 1953 to 1973. And she died in 1977, and the award was created in 1978 to commemorate her memory because she was a huge champion of Northwest artists, and kept telling Dr. Fuller, who was a longtime museum director, that he needs to pay attention to the artists at his doorsteps, not just for away. And it's really has had a storied history. In the very beginning, I heard, because we just awarded the most recent award to Leo Burke this year. In the very beginning, I heard the Betty Bowen Award was able to give $300 to the winner. Currently, we're able to give $15,000 to the winner. Again, it's an annual award. And depending on the year, there can be either no or one or two additional finalists, depending on the kind of work that's being presented, and the other special recognition awards have $2,500 each at the current level. So it is an art award given with the intention of singling out an artist who is producing compelling and original work and is making a real difference to the contemporary conversation about art in a much larger sense. So even though the artist might be working in the Northwest, the conversation is meant to be much broader. I think that's all I'm going to say right now.
Is there a show associated with the award?
Yeah, it's not a big show. I would say it's more an installation. It's a relatively small space, but we have the winner has a presentation that's up for 3 months. It's up right now until March if you want to come and see it.
Very good, thank you. Kristan?
Thanks. I'm Kristan. I am a local artist and a curator. I'm here to talk about the Precipice Fund, but I wanted to say that the reason there was the conversation about Portland Institute for Contemporary Art is that at our founding, there was a very specific choice to use that word instead of, because we don't collect art, but we are for art or for artists. And since our inception, commissioning work and developing work with artists in residence has been a core part of our programming with local, national, and international artists. And our exhibition program, our visual art program, because it doesn't always compose of exhibitions, as we think of them, is year-round and has been since we moved in our new space last year. The Precipice Fund is something I'm really personally passionate about. It's something that we have been advocating for about 6 years and wanting to come to our region. It's part of the Warhol regional regranting program that was founded several years ago, and really was the brainchild of a woman named Courtney Fink, who's the executive director at Southern Exposure. And she went to Warhol Board and said, you know, there's all of this artist-generated activity and organizations happening in our area, and I think there needs to be support for it. They're not formally organized, they're not nonprofits, and they're falling through the cracks, and they're really vital to our system. That sounds a lot like Portland to me. I moved here in 1995, and I believe that artist-run organizations and activities are just as important as the major institutions, if not more so, and sometimes and are really overlooked. So the Precipice Fund is, I'll read you the mission statement because it does have a mission. The Precipice Fund provides critical support for artist-driven organizations, projects, initiatives, and publications that exist on the edge of new practice. These projects operate outside of traditional forms of support, galvanize communities, promote critical dialogue, and encourage, generate, an expansive artistic process while driving culture forward regionally and nationally. These informal, anti-institutional, serious, intentionally nebulous, and innovative projects are an integral part of Portland's vital art ecology and are emulative of the pioneering spirit of the Pacific Northwest. Each region that the grant is in, it's in several across the United States, gets to name their own fund. We named it Precipice, based on another foundation actually that was founded by several artists that has gone away, but I always loved their description of that word and thinking about being on the edge of something and that generative space right there on the edge. So what it is, we've just run through our very first inaugural season of information sessions, and we had over 70 artist groups apply. So everyone has to be a collaborative or work in a way with a community in some way. And we'll give away $75,000 in grants, anything from $500 to $5,000. I can tell you after reviewing the grants, no one asked for $500. Everyone asked for more. We assemble an independent panel, so this isn't about PICA's curatorial or my curatorial taste. So we have a panel of 3 people that will be coming to Portland next weekend, or some of them are from Portland, to review the grants, and then we'll very quickly cut checks for artists by the end of the year. It's a very simple application. We made it intentionally friendly for artists. We want to get money directly into their hands, as Terri talks about, and let them do what they do and not police their budgets or, micromanage their applications. So I'm really excited about next weekend, and I can't wait to call 15 people or 50 people and tell them they have money to do their projects. So, yeah.
Very good. Amanda, I think I'm going to skip you for a minute.
Okay.
Just because
We did a switcheroo.
yeah, but because I want to talk to you and lead into the next part of the conversation. Okay. So Bryan, maybe you could describe a little bit how Disjecta puts money in artists' pockets.
I would be happy to. I'm Bryan Suereth. I'm the director at Disjecta. It is lovely to see so many familiar faces out here. And Terri, I do want to point out that PICA has had many iterations also. We all have.
But the art gym's only had one.
I know, but you're special.
Does iteration mean space? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's how I took it. It is ultimately the nature of young nonprofit organizations. And when Disjecta was founded in 2000, we utilized the only asset we had to support artists, and that was space. And at the time in the city, there was a lack of opportunity for artists to exhibit work. And we did what we could in the early years. There are many faces in here that I know have shown at Disjecta over the years before we were able to provide anything besides a space. But that is a critical asset, and over the early years, we always pined for an ability to support artists financially. And Disjecta has focused on that in the last 4 or 5 years since we've been in our facility in North Portland, and really attempted to build a sustainable model of programs that could not only provide that very important space and opportunity, but to provide some funding to artists as well. And so the 2 programs that we have built that fulfill that are the Curator in Residence program and the Portland Biennial. The Curator in Residence program, we bring a curator from, it could be a local curator, it could be someone from a national sphere, to Portland to curate for 1 year. And in that time, they engage with this community, and they're able to provide artists directly with funding for their projects. And most often, these projects are new works, and that is a real focus for that program. We do have one small mandate in the program, and that is that it must include local artists during the run of the season. And we do that so that we don't lose that critical opportunity for local artists to engage with curators from outside the region and to show amongst artists that are showing and exhibiting nationally. The second program, many of you are familiar with, is the Biennial. And it's interesting how Bonnie mentioned that in 2005, 2006, I think, was the last Oregon Biennial at the Art Museum. And the museum decided they wanted to go in a different direction. And as a smaller organization, we looked at the gap that ended up creating here in Oregon, because it is focused so regionally and because there are a much smaller number of artists that can participate. We felt that it was a critical reflection on what was happening and what was important in the state. and wanted to bring back the biennial in a slightly different way that a smaller organization would. And so we built the Portland Biennial on the premise that it is important to provide that platform and showcase for Oregon artists. The program now has grown. There's some healthier funding for it, and we are able to provide artists with stipends. In 2010 was the inaugural year. There were 24 artists that Chris Moss included in his exhibition. In 2012, Prudence Roberts included 20 artists. And this year, in 2014, I should say next year, Amanda Hunt has included 15 artists in her exhibition. And so as the dollars have grown, we've been able to provide larger working stipends for the artists included. So that is the track that we've taken to help provide artists with working funds and opportunities to exhibit. And as Bonnie said, the ancillary things that go along with that, producing a catalog, sending it around the country, trying to keep the artists that are working in the state fresh on the minds of people elsewhere around the country. So those are the opportunities that we've built, and we certainly look forward to hearing some more questions and comments about that.
Thank you, Bryan. I mean, I thought maybe you could put on all your hats, you know, so that you you're having this experience as a guest curator for Disjecta and experiencing the way they're trying to support the artists that you want to exhibit. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what kind of support you're able to provide to artists as they produce new work there, and maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing in LA or programs that you know about that you could tie into this discussion.
Sure. As Bryan's described, over the number of years that Disjecta's handled the biennial, the number of artists has decreased, but the level of funding has increased, and that's a really important thing for me in this process. I wanted artists to be able to create a new body of work, to commission them to create new work for this context, because it's a platform for them. I believe strongly that the biennial is a way to give visibility to either familiar or unfamiliar practices, to grow a body of work that might have been previously unrealized. So really focusing a lot of attention on that has been a joy. It's really nice to be in development of new ideas and kind of be involved every step of the way, and to know that there's funding for that, or that we'll have to try to create more funding around that as things evolve. And that ties into my work in Los Angeles at LAXART, where I've been for the past 2.5 years. That space was founded in 2005, and it's one of the fundamental tenets of that space is to provide support for experimental programs, to commission new works by artists, and that can be something as large as a house constructed in the gallery, or something as small as an addition that we would sell to the public to support the program. So a lot of experience kind of in that idea of an artist coming to present an idea and wanting to build that with the institution, with the organization from the ground up, and figuring out ways in which to do that together. So it's a nice kind of shared parallel value, I think, in both organizations and both hats that I work under.
Thank you. You know, all of our programs and institutions have to raise money for every single thing that we do, right? And sometimes I think the assistance that we can provide to artists isn't front and center. And I think part of it's just the reality of the difficulty in raising money. And it's interesting to me to look at these things and think about, in the programs you've all mentioned, what were the sources of the money? And wondering if any of you could speak to what kind of sources you see, where you might see some potential in the future. How do we educate the entities and individuals, foundations, corporations that have money to want to fund programs that put the money in artists' pockets. How do we do that? And do you guys have any ideas of new programs that are going in that direction? Where do we go next? How do we build on this? Because obviously it's not enough. You could win every award that all of you are doing, and a single artist could not make a living, right? Even if they won them all in the same year. So it isn't really very much. So how, some of the programs are new, and unfortunately, Luis, is that how we say his name? Yeah, from the Henry Gallery is not here because they have a new program called the Brink Award, and I'm wondering, some of you may know a little bit more about that, and maybe could share it, because that's something very new, is my understanding.
It is. I wish I had a little more information for you. I emailed with Luis this morning, but he was so sick, he just saw my email 5 minutes before I walked in here, so he didn't have time to put anything more together. But it is a very new award, and I know it goes to, quote unquote, emerging artists. And you will be able to look this up on the website. I think it's a nominating process. And I'm not exactly sure how large the cash amount is that is attached to that.
$12,500.
Yeah, but this is not going to be that helpful to anyone here in the room, but there has been a very interesting development in Seattle with the new foundation. I don't know if any of you have heard that. Sherry Benke and her husband John are behind that. And they're making a huge push to promote specifically Seattle-based artists. And this ties back in with what Amanda said a minute ago about this whole issue of visibility. And it goes back to what Terri just said about you could win every single art award and you could still not be able to make a living just by your art practice. And it's the recognition, I think, at a curatorial level, that in order to be successful, you have to be able to reach out as an artist and connect in other places, to be able to show your work in other places, to be recognized elsewhere. And how does that happen? I mean, obviously that happens through the gallery worlds, right? The people who represent you, place your work in collections, public, private. Will have interface with curators elsewhere, and that's in a way an education process. And likewise, what perhaps all of us individually do is, the more we learn about the artists that work in our region, and then when we have conversations with other people in far-flung places from, who knows, Boise to New York, Berlin, you name it, to say, oh, this is an interesting show you're working on. Maybe you should be looking at artist X, Y, and Z, that I just happen to know. I mean, there is that, it remains very invisible, but I think it's a really key component to how some people perhaps get recognition and others fly under the radar for a really long time. It has to do with those networks. And that's where the Benke's for the new foundation want to make a difference, to kind of single out artists that are nominated by kind of a peer community, and also they're bringing in outside curators. Right now, they did this one year, and they're doing it again, I think, in December, where they bring curators from, big metropolitan areas, larger institutions, to kind of do studio visits with people in town, to kind of raise the level of recognition of some of the artists working in the city. And I'm excited about it because I think that also could make a big difference to artists. So again, I think we all want artists to have money in their pockets to work, but I think there are other connective tissues that are really important as well, and something to keep in mind.
Thank you. Kristan, do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, how did it come about that PICA went after the Warhol money?
So we're funded by the Warhol Foundation, and so as part of that is people who work for organizations. When you're funded by a foundation or an individual, you visit them. You keep them up to date with what you're doing with their money. Warhol is a really extraordinary foundation, as are most of the artist-founded foundations in the United States and elsewhere. I mean, I think, again, if you look at the ethics of artists supporting artists in institutions or in foundations, you'll see that at the core of their missions is getting money directly in the hands of artists, always. So one of the things that Warhol has always done is supported excellent artistic programming, but in their, and that's one of the ways that through organizations, that they support an artist community. They also do this, they've funded a leadership institute and other things, and they've been trying to diversify their funding. They really, in their bylaws, they can't give money directly to an artist, just hand it to them. They have to give it to an organization through an exhibition program. So part of starting the re-granting program was going to organizations that they trust and work with and they feel are paying attention to what's going on in the community to redistribute funds for them. So PICA doesn't make money from this fund, we just redistribute it. It's like a pass-through. And it's a workaround for Warhol to get money there. In addition, though, one of the reasons that we could leverage that in addition to sitting in front of them and saying, Portland is a really special place, here are the 10 organizations. I mean, we just don't go and talk about PICA. We really don't. We talk about organizations, we talk about artists, we talk about the city as a whole, and we talk about the community that invests in all of those programs. So after many years of doing that, and sitting in front of them and saying it's critical that these artists get that support, they came to us and said that. But one of the reasons we were able to leverage it is that another young foundation, the Calligram Foundation, which is run by a really young woman, had come to us and said that they were interested in getting money directly in the hands of artists. And that young woman is also an artist. And so we knew that we were going for Warhol, and we said, if you come in and support this, we think we can leverage them. And so they both came in simultaneously. The Calligram Foundation also helped us start a more formal commissioning fund that was directed specifically to funding regional art projects at lots of different levels, and their logo is all over the TBA catalog and other things, and you can see what programs we distributed that money to. But even when we don't have direct funding for artists, even if it's a program that's funding a lecture series or something like that, giving an artist a fee, paying for their supplies, flying them in and housing them is integral to every single program that I present. I know that it's never enough, but I put almost all of my programming money towards paying for every expense that they have. And that's a main part of the ethics. And I think that, Bryan saying that, and working artists for a greater economy, organizing themselves in New York and talking to institutions and saying that, yes, advocacy is important, exhibition opportunities are important, connections are important, but artist fees are critical. And so there's a big movement just among an artist community and institutions to sort of talk about money, which we don't talk about in the art world, and start advocating for these direct moments of support.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that so many organizations are founded by artists. PICA, Christy Edmonds, for example. And I'm thinking of the Pollock Krausner Foundation. I mean, there are other big foundations that have been founded by artists who were highly successful and knew really personally and directly the need for this kind of support. And there are artists in this room who have received those grants from those foundations in other parts of the country, which is fantastic that we've benefited from some of that foresight. It seems like those of us who are involved on the other side as presenters, as in institutions, we do have kind of we have opportunity and responsibility. And we are connectors to those people who have the means and have the interest in the arts. And So I think we have the potential to build on this. I mean, I'm thinking of Harold and Arlene Schnitzer. Arlene Schnitzer founded a gallery here in Portland at the behest of artists. You know, so even though she was not an artist, that gallery was the result of the efforts of artists.
She went to museum school.
She did go to the museum school. But luckily, they directed her energies. Thank you, Mike Russo and Louis Bunce. So it's, I think we have kind of I think artists have a responsibility to educate us. We have a responsibility to educate the people that we're connected with. One example I might give is the Ford Family Foundation sort of miraculously came out of the woodwork about 5 years ago with the Hallie Ford Initiative. And they went around the state and talked to many, many people and asked if they did a visual arts initiative in honor of the late Hallie Ford, what should they do? And obviously, a lot of people told them they should do stuff for artists. So somebody comes to you and says, what should I spend my money on?
We know what to say.
We know what to say. And these people, Hallie Ford was an artist of sorts. She was interested in it. But the foundation was primarily interested in higher education. So this was a departure for them, and it's a big foundation. But it's been an important aside for many of us. I mean, the Art Gym has received support for 3 publications. I mean, bigger grants than anybody ever gives us. They seem to understand that things cost money. They're not kind of parsimonious with the funds. I think Disjecta has benefited, for example. Do you want to say something, Bryan?
Yeah, I do. I think you're on an interesting track, and that is, where does the funding come from? You know, we've heard a couple of examples, and I think in Portland there were relatively small sources of funding until the Ford Family Foundation stepped up and created a huge fund. Not only do they give artists career
Opportunity grants,
fellowships, but they have put money into exhibitions and programs that turn around and fund artists as well. And we also have something coming up with the Fields Fund from the Oregon Community Foundation. That is another entity that is stepping up, that did research, that went around the community and said, where can we put this money? Where is it best served in the community? And so that's an exciting opportunity that is happening now here in Portland. But before that, if you wanted to really build a program, you almost had to go outside of the region to find support. And I think that the Andy Warhol Foundation has very recently been funneling a lot of money into Portland through PICA, to Disjecta, to Yale Union, Cinema Project. It's almost as if they've now caught up with the love affair the rest of the country has with Portland and said, you know what, darn it, something good is going on there and we're going to fund it. And what that does is it shines a spotlight and helps organizations that are, you know, established as PICA, that are moving up the ranks as Disjecta, to get recognition, to be able to access funding from other national foundations. And I think that's really key to growing the support that we can give to artists. And the other key that I've been hearing is that artists like to fund artists. So, you know, the particular conundrum there is that most artists are not capable of funding artists. But what's interesting is that more successful artists, more established artists that return or that can build careers that are substantial, are likely to return that money to the communities that they came from. And so that's why it's incredibly important to help fund artists, so that it's almost a replenishing effect. And I think that that's one thing that we can focus on, and that with the help of the foundations now focusing on getting more money in artists' pockets, that can happen in Portland.
And I think
in the
that
region.
just for artists, fund artists understand the importance of it, but we also need to get through to the people who are not artists and help them understand that there's sort of a really key little mantra that I always say, which is, without artists, there is no art. So if your community, if your philanthropy is geared toward building our place as a place that has a cultural vitality, then if that's what you want, like if that was your goal, then it's important for people whose goal that is to understand this investment in the individual artist and their practice. And I think that that responsibility for that kind of education lies with us.
It's very difficult to fundraise around a specific artist project. It's nearly impossible. And there are individuals who really do step up and donate small and large amounts of money, and a lot of volunteer labor and memberships go into all of the kinds of things we're talking about. But as institutions, we often have to bury that support in these other grants about community. And so I think that one of the things that we're all talking about is creating a clarity and transparency around, the dollars that come into an institution and where they go and what they go to support. And certainly also, as we all know on this panel, where we are also underfunded as institutions, but the people who work at the institutions are advocating on the artist's behalf are also similarly, coming up against this. I think one of the things is it's very difficult to prove that the immaterial has value, and the use value of art is always being debated in society and culture. We kind of know that it's important, but we try to make charts and graphs and audience numbers and all of those things, and that's what we've started to rely on to prove that art is valuable. How many people come through the door, what our contextualizing lectures are about around it. But it's very difficult just to say supporting this work to be made or supporting a new idea is critical and valuable. And so the more, I don't know if we can ever find evidence for that, but if we purport our belief in that as a culture, then there will be more money for it. But until we believe that the immaterial has value, it will continue to be hard to raise funds for it.
So I think talking about endowment a little bit, and I agree, artists do support artists, and I think that's very valuable, but I also think we have to think about collectors and how collectors support artists, and I can talk about that certainly because of Arlene Schnitzer and Harold Schnitzer, but others as well who love art and collect it, and I think one of the things that artists in the community can do when they have collectors that really love their work and help support them is to help collectors think about their long-term future. The Northwest is pretty young. There's old money in the Northwest is probably lumber money from like the Ford money. That's old Northwest money. It's 100 years old. It came from cutting down trees. And, it really did. And that's okay. We're all living in wooden houses here mostly. So I'm sort of like eating beef. But anyway, I think that, you have to, if you can encourage people like Arlene and Harold Schnitzer to do an endowment that supports the arts and, as you were saying, supports the institution as well, because if we're going to have a presenting place, we too need to be funded as we re-grant, to be able to write those grants in the first place that support artists. So I think anything that can be done to really support funds that are stable and not those kind of funds that you have to work over and over for every year and, you know, spend 60% of your development time or more begging for granted funds.
What is that
might
called?
change.
That sounds great.
Yeah, doesn't it? 100%? Okay, 105, 110%. Well, having raised money before, you know, I know what this is like. And I think that endowment really is important, and to be able to encourage collectors and those philanthropists to grant the money on a permanent basis. And, you know, the Ford Foundation I have to giantly salute, because they really did a great job of figuring out what different sorts of things they could do in the community. Like they have 7 different initiatives, and some of it's directly giving artists money, and some of it is, you know, doing education, inviting guest curators. All of those things are great. I think, you know, when the Schnitzers funded the Curator of Northwest Art position for $3.5 million, which is the largest funded curatorial position at the Portland Art Museum. It allowed some money for salary, for purchasing artwork. It's not a lot, but it's for purchasing artwork, and for doing programming that can then re-grant some money to artists. And that then becomes stable. And it becomes something that can be built upon. And I think that's really, really important. So I guess, you know, it never would have happened without people like Mike Russo and Louis Bunce and some of the other artists that really encouraged Arlene Schnitzer early on to be very interested in artists and to understand the fact that it's always an uphill battle to even buy the materials to make your work. And that is something that an institution, by collecting work and showing it and promoting it to a larger community, can help artists in the long run. So I guess I'd say back to artists, you know, if you can do anything, if you have collectors that are, you know, baby billionaires, and there are some that are growing up in our community around high tech and other things, you know, help encourage them to think about endowing funds to institutions that are doing great programming. I think that's really important.
I mean,
they're out there.
Usually people are thinking about endowing curatorial positions, directors' positions, but why not endow a fund that is basically to fund commissioning art? I mean, that can be run by any number of types of institutions. It seems like there's room to just see if anybody bites. You know, I mean, why not say what I really need money for as a curator is to pay my artists so they can do the most amazing thing they can think of and have the money to do it. That would get us further. So I don't know if there's anybody in this room, you know, who wants to do that, but, you know, why should it be off the table? I mean, we could put that on the table.
It definitely isn't off the table, and I think people are doing it. I mean, there are individuals in this room that give money to support just that without a question. But I will say that there are a few national efforts to do that. So we represent one province in the United States, but there are many others that are assembling panels just like this. And I'm part of a newly founded organization called The Field, which is artist-run, artist-centric organizations that are forming a national network. It's an advocacy network for funding for artist projects, unincorporated artist projects, and institutions, and talking about the kind of multi-level approach of funding, and that all are important to fund really stable programs and really unstable things that you're just seeding and walk away from. And the money will do something good. And what's interesting about those efforts is sitting at a table with 75 different organizations or artist projects and having us all have the same conversation. But one of the things that happened in that room really early on was that all of us agreed that any foundation that we had or funder that we sat in front of that we would say exactly that. That we would say, we don't need new initiatives around certain little programs that we have to invent to get money. We need monies to go into supporting commissions. Because as we know that we're hitting, 30 or 40 years into these, we can look back and say these master projects that happened when Saul LeWitt and Lucinda Childs and Rauschenberg and John Cage and all these artists worked together that were supported by major institutions are now, our master works. That all of the work that we're doing at this table and some of you are doing out in the audience will become that anecdote 30 years from now. And so we really have an opportunity to seed artist projects and come up with what is the future of our understanding around, genres, society, issues, all of that stuff by seeding these projects. So that was one of the first things we talked about, just saying it out loud, that that's what the need is and not being afraid. Because I think so often we're so desperate in the art world for money that we just chase it and we say whatever we need to say to get it. So it takes a lot of courage for an institution or an artist to say, actually what I need it for is this. Can you do that?
Catharina, I was wondering, you've been in this country for a long time, but you are from another continent. If maybe there is something in your understanding, sort of internationally, that might be a model for us to consider here. Maybe the problems are the same, maybe the problems are different.
I was actually I shouldn't say I was bemused, but the conversation would be so different if we were having it in Europe. I mean, there are countries like the Netherlands that give artists an annual stipend. Denmark too. It's a profession, you get paid. In the Netherlands also, I don't know if they still continue that, but the government bought, I think, a piece every so many years, probably until they run out of storage space. There is, of course, also a very different institutional structure, just because institutions are funded by the government. I mean, the money is constantly getting less. I don't want to, paint this in glorious colors. It's not as lush and nice as it used to be. But it buys you also, in terms of programming, a certain degree of independence, and that's a big difference in this country. I mean, if I'm looking around Seattle, all the money is private money, especially going towards, any initiatives dealing with artists based in the Northwest. And I have to say, maybe it's because I am German, I have a resistance to just saying Northwest artists, because that groups people into like one lump, as if, I have a real issue with that. So I rather say, for me, it's more important that people are making great art, and I really don't care where they're making it. It's wonderful if you're working in Portland. It's wonderful if you're working in Seattle. It's wonderful if you're working elsewhere. But I think this notion of the local and the national or the international are artificial boundaries, and really what it's all about is more having a conversation about creating great opportunities, right at our doorstep, but then also, creating to other networks. I would be very curious to know how many people in this room are artists. Quite a few, yeah, quite a few. I would also be very curious to know how many of you have applied to any of the local or regional, funding opportunities. And how many of you have applied to, say, national or international residencies, other awards? Yeah. Okay, not quite as many, but quite a few. That's really great to see. I find that very encouraging. I wish I had a silver bullet.
And
for
people have
funding.
had success, so that encourages other people to
Right, exactly.
apply, I think, is part of what's happening there. One person I have hardly heard anything from is Amanda, and so I wondered if, as this discussion has progressed, if things have occurred to you that you'd like to share.
Just two things. It's kind of a naive question, but I wanted to return to, I think, where this aspect of the conversation started, which was, you mentioned education. How do you educate the patron class? How do you educate people who are uninformed about what they're looking at, or feel intimidated by the experience of coming to a museum, coming to an organization that they're unfamiliar with? So just kind of wanting to gather intel and pick brains and see, if there's something that you all have experienced in your own institutions that's been effective or not, because it's certainly a problem that extends to our work in Los Angeles. We're funded also by the Warhol Foundation, but that money runs out quickly. The Department of Cultural Affairs is also a granting organization for us, so that helps, but largely it's private funding. And Kristan mentioned kind of, the extreme difficulty of that. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's really, you got to go to battle every month, every 6 weeks, every year to kind of find the money. And sometimes it is that conversation with the same person a year later, 6 months down the line. There's not a lot of, for lack of better words, fresh blood in that kind of way. So it's how do you encourage more dialogue around art and kind of extend the community? And then the other thing that I kind of got to thinking was, how do you encourage the dialogue between organizations and institutions, and not just within the Pacific Northwest region, but certainly starting there. I'm here from Los Angeles. I'm guest curating an exhibition in a part of the country I haven't spent a lot of time in, and I'm afforded a wonderful opportunity to do that. So I think kind of the steps that takes, even just sharing information about the struggles that we have as a nonprofit in Los Angeles and how that applies to Disjectas or PICAs, all of these things are related, and I think that's part of the honesty of the conversation that maybe is lacking sometimes. It's like, how can we talk about the same problems and reach solutions maybe by sharing information? Generous and generative,
Bonnie promised me she'd keep track of the time, but I don't think she is.
Well, we really got started a little late, but it's probably time to, we've got
Transition to some questions,
Yeah.
maybe?
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe start here.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question for the whole panel.
Could you maybe stand up? I'm sorry, but the big room.
I have a question for the whole panel, for anyone. I've only lived here for a year and a half, and I'm not aware of any efforts by institutions or organizations to fund criticism, and I was wondering if you guys have made any attempts to do so. And that seems to me to be the kind of key missing link, or one of the things that I observed to be a key piece that isn't.
And you would have observed that if you've moved here 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money with that one. It is certainly a significant problem here, and it's, I think the Ford Foundation is a little bit kind of going in that direction, but I hope that they go further down that road, and I think it's something that's a very good thing for all of us to think about and advocate for, because you're right, we don't at the Portland Art Museum, do that, and gosh, that might be looked at as sort of like, is nepotism the right word, maybe, if we were trying to pay critics, because we then hope, of course, they only said wonderful things about us. But I'm sure somebody out there really should do it, and we would love to have that happen.
I think it's a really important point because, more and more, I don't know how much you've been noticing this, there's like this strange merger between curatorial work, writing, and criticism all at once. And in part, I think it's because there's less and less independent criticism, and yet at the same time you hear the same voices over and over again. So, and the more you're also working in smaller centers, huge lack of criticism. So I have a funny little anecdote to share with you. About a year ago, I'd invited Robert Storr to meet, with some of our collectors group for a, kind of focused talk on the situation of the arts right now, and he talked about this and that and the other, and in the end he said, if you really wanted to do something great for your local arts community here, you would be endowing the position of an art critic. Yeah. And everyone in the room kind of looked at their toes. And then one person who was perhaps more honest than the rest said, kind of slyly and to the side, but what if I don't like what they write? So sadly, no one yet has risen to the occasion to kind of follow through with that. It's hugely important. And again, it's something, that fosters a critical thinking that helps us all to kind of grow, individually, as a community. And I think what ties in with what Robert just said also is the kind of well-being of our art schools and art programs. And I think that's very lively here in Portland, but I think in Seattle also there's a lot more that could be done, because the more nationally and internationally recognized artists you have teaching, or art historians, or literary figures, and the more synergy you have between different departments, that too then creates opportunities and networks that will come back into the city and eventually also create new funding opportunities. So I mean, in all these different arenas, I think we can't look at one thing independent from all these different others. They're really crucial. But the plight of the critic is a huge one. Yes.
How about here? Oh, how about I kind of work my way back? Gabe?
I'm curious about, my question is regarding timeline. When you curate as an the Biennial or the Northwest Art Awards, how much of a running start are you giving artists to be able to diversify that funding stream? Do they have enough time to be able to apply for RAC grants, which is in August? Or I guess they have time usually to apply for what are these, like the Award Arts Commission?
Well, for the Contemporary Northwest Art Awards, we've been trying to start the nominating process about 2 years out. So I'm actually looking at next month or the following month to begin the nominating process. And we gave the artists a little bit, about 14 months lead time this time. My last show, I got here in really the beginning of September, and Bruce said, you got to do the Northwest Art Awards in 9 months, it's going to open, which was not enough time. But now, since it's a biennial, really it's an ongoing process and it starts right away. So we do try to give artists enough time to apply for some various kinds of grants to produce their work if they need to. And we try to support artists as much as possible, although, and I think things are changing with the way work is often less object-oriented, and, painters are used to buying their canvas and their paints and slogging it out. And I think the other forms of art don't do that so much. So that's also something that we think about when we ask people, to do a major installation for a show like this. But that's something that we're still kind of addressing. This is a very changing time right now, I think, and I have to say something real quick about art critics. I think that's really changing too, because as our newspapers and magazines fold and things go digital, look at several, they used to pay art critics at the newspapers and some of the magazines, and they're doing that less because they're not selling paper anymore. So they're going digital, and the whole deal is changing. And I think we're in this time right now that's very different, and it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. But yeah, we're trying to do lead time of about a year and a few months at least.
Way in the back. You.
I'm a secretary. I was a student at PNCA, and so I kind of feel like I have a vested interest in this. I also previously worked at OHSU for 12 years, and so I got to see kind of the development of, like, say, the Night Cancer Institute. And what I think about in this conversation is, like, anybody kind of, when we talk about networking, is creating a network between these various entities, like the Ford Foundation or the Schnitzers, and bringing these people together to maybe push towards this type of funding as a unit. I see, like say, the Night Cancer Institute. I think one of the things that's so successful about that is that push by the Night Institute is that it's bringing all these other funders in to make this a real successful entity. And I wonder if that could start to happen more around this issue.
Interesting.
I'm an actual working artist, and I actually sell my art and live off that. And
And I was just curious, when I go to this show and you expect me to bring my collectors, and I'm showing them this stuff and they're blank canvases, and they're looking at me and they're asking me to explain it, and I say, just, interpret it however you want. And, because my background is the Marine Corps, and so I don't have student loans, and all I can say is, I don't know what they're, putting out there. It's like an academic bubble, from what I can tell. But then you all say, we expect them to be able to survive and sell their artwork. Well, if it's an academic bubble and you're pushing what a lot of my friends perceive as nothing, blank canvases and ceramics that, I'll leave up to anybody else to, decipher. But, I don't even know what to say about all that stuff.
You know what I always say in answer to that is, and it's been fun working in the Intermountain West and working in Montana, because I love talking about art, is that I have no idea how a little laptop computer works, and there's no way that I could build a memory chip or a board like that. But I'm really glad somebody did, because I can use the product, and it takes me someplace I could never imagine. And I think it's really important to be able to imagine a different world and a different time, and artists do all sorts of work, and all kinds of work are valuable. And I think a lot of our newer artists who are perhaps more conceptual are just taking us someplace we don't yet know, and that's kind of important. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Rita?
So I think it's a wonderful beginning, but it really does feel like a beginning, because many of us here really are familiar with many of the things that have been discussed. It seems like there's an overall conversation about the ecology of the artwork, and that we need to have a conversation with critics, like a panel of critics, a panel of collectors, and just that this should be the beginning of something that keeps going.
Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful evening. A couple things come to mind. We haven't acknowledged RAC, which I think is extremely unique and important to our area. They have put a lot of money in our community, and they're a model, I think, program for the country. And their project grants is one good example of an effective way to get money to artists on a regular basis. The second thing we haven't acknowledged, and I'm going to draw something just for 30 seconds here, is Kristan D'Arcy. I don't know any of the details of why she's no longer the head of the Oregon Arts Commission, but I'm very concerned and frankly probably pissed off. I suspect she got fired in a manner that is going to be unacceptable to most of the people in this room, and I think it's up to us to take responsibility to find out why she's no longer the leader of the Oregon Arts Commission. She was a stellar leader and did a great deal for this state over a 19-year career, and if nothing else, she needs to know that we appreciate everything that she did for us.
Amen, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This is down the road a little bit, so I think equally important. We are potentially raising an entire generation that's culturally illiterate. We are vacating our schools with arts education. This is completely inexcusable. And it's up to us to fight and say this is wrong. And it's wrong in the short term, it's wrong in the long term, and we all need to do something about it collectively.
Great. Thank you. Daniel?
One of the things that Kristan said earlier made me think about, she was talking about how do we quantify the importance of the arts. And I think one of the things that sometimes people say, well, why is this important? And we don't ask people developing software or developing wind turbines or solar panels. We don't ask them how to quantify innovation. And I think one of the things we have to look at in our communities is if we want an innovative economy, we have to have a creative economy. And if you don't have arts, you can't fund arts, you can't have innovation. And so when someone says, why is this important? I think the answer of everyone in this room needs to be, if you think innovation is important, you should believe in the arts. And that was something that came to my mind when Kristan made her comment, but I just wanted to throw that out.
Maybe two more questions? How are we doing on time, Bonnie?
Can you please answer Angela Hunt's question about reaching out to patrons, please, the education to other people? I kind of blew over that, and I think that's a huge part of the conversation.
Would somebody like to respond to that?
I think we all do that all the time, I'm sure. And, it happens in small and large ways. It's... you know, whoops, the lights are off. We're out on the street here. And some of those things are long-term relationships, right? I mean, we're all, you know, as institutions, we're grappling with the fact that you have perhaps a trusted base of supporters and patrons who are at a very mature age, you know, at some point, and you're constantly trying to figure out how can we keep this community fresh, young, encourage new, younger people to be collecting. I think that was a point that was raised earlier. So it is through, again, you know, local networks of the people you already know saying, all right, who should we invite to this event or that event? Who can I give a tour through an exhibition? Who can I get interested in all these different things? It's a huge part of what we do. And so sometimes you have wonderful payoffs. Sometimes it takes you years and years. But that's, you know, a lot of the work that happens behind the scenes. And sometimes if you have trusted people, you can reach out and say, this is what I need.
And
you
I
know,
think
right
a
now.
lot of what curators do is try to bring artists' work together with the public. I mean, I call being a curator just advanced show and tell. That's all it is.
I also think there's a lot of contextual programming around exhibitions and every other thing going on in town. I mean, you all are here. This is part of raising awareness. We mentioned sitting in front of foundations that fund us and talking about other organizations and other artists and other cities that we think are doing good jobs, forming national networks, talking to each other, sharing equipment, you know, sharing information. We all do this with each other all the time across regions, across geographies, across personal taste. And I think it's really important. Can I say one more thing about the Chris Darcy thing? I think as someone who's lived in Oregon for 20 years and been supported by RAC and other just supported by Oregon Arts Commission as an artist, that I had no idea that something called Business Oregon or Oregon Business was running it. But I think that I could see the future of what this means. Most of the other government organizations are, they earn income, and the Oregon Arts Commission gives money away. So I think that there probably will be a shift, and they will want that arm of our state government to be raising money. It's something that is going to be pervasive. It's going to affect all of us as individual artists and institutions. We absolutely should demand accountability. It is completely bizarre that she was let go without a severance after working for 19 years for our state and all of us in this room. So I encourage you, the very little thing that you can do is call Business Oregon or Oregon Business, whatever they're called, someone correct me, and ask for an explanation. Write everyone you know and just keep gossiping about it until someone writes a real story. One of the people I think who's been really on top of it is April Bear at OPB. So if you have any information about it, you should slide it to her, and I know she'll talk about it on air.
Yes. Excuse me.
I think it's a challenging time right now for art and for all nonprofits and things. I'm a fundraiser, and I see little glimpses of opportunity on the fringes, and I just want to ask the panel about the whole social media Kickstarter and Indiegogo, because I get their emails and some of the projects are just so amazing, and creativity comes in a lot of forms, and all of us sometimes aren't ready to see it. And I think that's a very hopeful sign, even though it hasn't reached where it's going yet. I don't even know myself, but does anyone want to jump in and talk about that?
I was actually going to mention that earlier, because that is another source of funding that has been sort of independently developed from the sphere that we work in. And when everyone raised their hands and said, I'm an artist, you know, the next question is, how many of you have been funded by one of the organizations at this table? The next question is, how many of you have crowdfunded a project? And that's a really interesting question in a direction that can't quite be quantified yet. But it's also an interestingly anonymous way of getting funding, I think, from what I can tell. I've never done it personally. But it's so detached. And when we talk about reaching out to patrons and collectors and things, that's such a tactile approach. And so this crowdfunding thing is very different and maybe easier for some people to get behind projects. But I know organizations I believe, can even use it to fund projects. Now, I mean, we haven't done it yet, but as it develops as a tool, I mean, it actually is very developed now, but it may be something that becomes more of a resource for organizations and not just individual artist projects. So it's interesting.
The only thing, we're about to do a Kickstarter, and I'm not happy about it, so I'll just say that publicly. But also, I think the way it's been explained to me is that there are many people out there who we're not reaching through our year-end letter and all the same old ways, and we're watching everyone raise money this way, and we need to find out if there are those people who live in another state that travel to the TBA festival that will click and give us $10 this year. It's really critical, so I'm saying let's try it. But it makes me feel uncomfortable because it's been this mechanism, you know, even though we're an institution, we're always begging for money, we have avenues to get it. Right? That's why I advocated for Precipice, because it's for unincorporated organizations. We form nonprofits, we can write these grants. Some artists can't access those grants, right? And individuals can't access those grants unless they're under our tax shelter. So Kickstarter and all those things are ways that individuals can fundraise. The thing that I find problematic about Kickstarter, and I have given to many artist projects on it, is that we're training artists to operate like organizations, and that there is also this, what am I getting? The gift grab bag for what am I giving? And the broader conversation that we should be having in philanthropy and is one that is difficult to have, is that some of these very forward-thinking, older money people were really invested in giving because it was their they felt it was their civic responsibility. And yes, they asked for their name to be splattered over 400 buildings, but some of them didn't even ask for that and gave money. And that is a culture that's really diminishing. So Kickstarter is absolutely great, but what I would love to see artists do is come up with smaller rewards and see if they could raise the same amount of money, because I watch artists do that, do Kickstarter, and then spend half of their year making trinkets to send out, and they forget to add in the cost of the postage to mail people their signed poster or doodad or whatever they're giving out for that money. So that's the only thing that worries me about those models of giving, is that it's about what am I getting? It's like shopping. You know, I gave $25, I'm gonna get this artist-made object. So it's not always encouraging philanthropy as a, you know, just to give, nothing in return.
There's also the USA Artist has a fundraising platform, and anyone who, you have to have received a competitive award, but a lot of these opportunities
Would qualify.
or, you know, some other fellowships from RAC automatically qualify you. And I haven't had much experience, maybe Kristan, you shopped it, but I don't think it's maybe feels a little bit more artist-centric.
It's definitely artist-centric, and it's really generated from like a foundation funding an artist, and then they're allowed to go out and raise more money to match it. But it has less of a marketing arm than Kickstarter, these other funds, so not a lot of people know about it, so now we know about it. Can I just say that Randy's had his hand up for half an hour?
So I have all these questions, but you know, I talk with a lot of artists because I'm interested in art and what artists are doing, and many of them have said to me that even though they've applied for grants, that they never get them, ever. And those that do tend to be either directly connected with, let's call it a center of influence of some sort. And so I would like to ask the room, of all of the artists here that have applied for a grant, have grants been received, and have they been significant? I'm just kind of like, because I hear that it's I hear a lot of artists telling me that they've never seen anything.
Well, I can answer your question. When I was an artist, and I applied for several grants with REC, and I lived in 4 states, and I applied in Boston, and I applied in LA, I applied in West Virginia.
I'll say that that's the thing. The secret life of a panel is such that some of those artists that you're talking about were on that list, and then you watch them whittle them off because they only get this much money. The other thing I'll say that happens on a panel, which is unfortunate, and I'd advocate anyone who's invited to sit on the panel not to do this, is that everybody it kind of goes sometimes to this medium, very safe place because you're trying to reach group consensus. And so I tried something new the last time I sat on a rack panel, which is to basically award like 99s or zeros. And to only say, really, I'm invited there for my opinion, right? And to say, what are the best proposals in this bunch? Because when everybody's giving like 65s, I don't know, maybe this is the other thing, what happens is that the projects, you just start debating them after a while, and it just goes, you see a lot of interesting artists not get funded. You see a lot of interesting artists get funded too. I'm not saying that it always works out that way, but there's a problem with the panel format. So in Precipice, we ask people to come with their opinions, and it may be controversial. Maybe some people won't be funded, and we also ask them to grade yes, no, maybe, and not have this like sliding scale that's so nebulous some people get cut off. But really it's usually due to lack of funding not matching need. I think a lot of those artists you're talking about were just like right there. And they would have gotten funded had there been
I would like to bring
$5,000.
up work for art if we're going to talk about crowdsourcing, because that is a source that RAC developed, which is you can do workplace giving to RAC. And the pool of funds that they have available to give away, a lot of that money is coming from that, which is people basically just giving.
It's the united way.
It's the united way of the art world. And so kudos to RAC for just thinking that up and getting it working. I think we should stop. Is somebody desperate to ask one more question? No, we're done.